be expelled. I mean, I don't think there wouldn't be a trial or anything like that for something like that, but I think they would just throw you out. They would tell you to leave.
Okay.
And they would consider it as a security risk. So, and part of my evidence for this is that I had a conversation with a woman many years ago who was a friend, who was married to the chair of the Communist Party in Northern California at the time that I talked to her. And she told me the story. She said she was asked by the party leadership in New York, she was living in San Francisco, to go and talk to women in the Communist Party and ask them if they had had a sexual relationship with another woman. And if they had, she was told to ask them to voluntarily leave the party. But if they didn't, they would be expelled. And I just have to say, if you think about the terrors of the 50s, I mean, I lived through it. I was a kid, but how many people were arrested and being under surveillance all the time, and losing your jobs and all the things that were going on, and to have that kind of awful, because the party would form part of your home, it would be part of the place where you had solidarity and friendships and so forth, and to be forced out like that was a great cruelty, in my opinion.
So the central revelation of your book that is so remarkable is that it reconceptualizes the origin story of the modern gay movement. That elements, when we look back, I think we're very vague about our history. We have there's work that's been done on MATTACHINE, right? There's still no big book on GLF, Gay Liberation Front, or Gay Activists Alliance. There is work, but there's still a lot of patchy places. But we've all kind of adopted this idea that different factions and communities had just evolved somehow simultaneously, miraculously. And apparently that is not the case. What is remarkable in that this book reveals is how many different tendencies inside the queer movement come from and be traced to the Communist Party. I mean, and we're going to go talk about some of them, but MATTACHINE, that's the best known. Lesbian separatism and women's music through Alex Dobkin, who was raised in the Communist Party. PFLAG, and we're going to come back to that. Lorraine Hansberry, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. I mean, all and so much more.
Flexner.
Yeah, and Eleanor Flexner. And what you point out that makes it all click is that whether people left the party, whether they were in the party, whether they were expelled from the party, they learned how to think politically in the party. They learned how to analyze their communities as a constituency and how to develop a liberation theory around gay experience in the party. And that is a new piece of understanding of how we see our own history. So I congratulate you, and I'm stunned by that. So I want to go through some of the examples and just
thank you.
And get some specifics. So let's start with the best known, Harry Hay and MATTACHINE. So can you tell us his history?
I can tell you a little bit about Harry. Yeah. I fell in love with him listening to his oral history. I was in the New York Public Library, and John D'Amelio did his oral history, and it goes on for hours. And I had the earphones on, on the old-fashioned cassette tapes, and I was listening to it. And what a story! So he's born. He's raised in Southern California. His father was, I think, an engineer, or a fairly conservative kind of thing. But his mother was a source of tremendous support for him. And I think he knew he was gay from a very young age. And the other thing that makes him very unique in the people that I've read about it is he loved being gay. He loved men. He just did. I mean, and he didn't have internalized homophobia. That wasn't part of who he was. He was lovers for a time with Will Geer, the actor Will Geer, who, but before that, his father thought that he ought to start working with, during the summers, would send him off to work with migratory farm workers haying. They called it haying, putting the hay together. And there were a lot of IWW, that's the Industrial Workers of the World. There were a lot of guys from the IWW who did that work. And so they handed him, he's very funny. They handed him Marxist tracts. He said oily and dog-eared and everything like that, and told him to read it at night. So you stay overnight, and in the morning they would quiz him on it. So that was his actual first introduction to Marxism, was these IWW guys. And then he said when he was in school, he was doing very well in what he thought was a very fine public schools in Los Angeles. But then he was also being a Jesuit priest, wanted him to go into the priesthood. He thought he would be excellent for the priesthood. So he said he had all these tendencies pulling him in different directions, but the main tendency, you see, was that he loved men. So that's just a little bit. And then he was lovers with Will Geer, who was in the Communist Party. And Will took him to some meetings, which he thought were a total bore when he first went to them. But he loved Will's initiatives with theater. They would go to the farm workers in the Central Valley of California and in the southern part of the state where there were a lot of farm workers, and they did theater skits and things like that to help with the organizing, and he loved that. And eventually what happened was that he, and Will and Harry were at the 1934 general strike in San Francisco. The International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union had a huge strike in 1934, which is sort of a bellwether of union organizing in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was very important. So he was there, and the police repressed it, and it made a big impression on him and so on. So, and then he got involved in the Popular Front Against Fascism, especially during the Spanish Civil War. And that was when his own political initiative came more into being, where he could see that. So he decided that he wanted to join the Communist Party because the party was everywhere doing that anti-fascist organizing. And he knew that they banned degenerates, of which he said he was surely one. So he decided to go see a psychiatrist. And he said psychiatry was very new in those days. But the psychiatrist told him that he would be fine if he married a woman, a masculine-like woman. That would take care of it. So he said to himself, I can do that. I know how to do that. So he wooed a woman whose name was Anita Platke, who was a communist, because he met her on the picket lines. And they got married. But before they got married, they had to be approved by the party leadership. And so he told them the whole truth about who he was. She knew that he had been gay or was gay, whatever. And the party finally approved their marriage and their membership, and he joined the party. And they were together for 13 years. But he had a lot of male lovers during that time, and she stayed with him. And so that's, but the other part of it is he was an erudite Marxist scholar. He taught classes for the California Labor School, which I think is part of what you're asking about. He taught about class struggle by analyzing folk music and carols through the ages, starting in the medieval times. His classes were the most popular at the California Labor School. He's very charismatic. And he also was the education secretary for his club. And in that education role, he read, analyzed, and taught the party's theories about Black liberation and the special oppression of Black people. So when he founded MATTACHINE, one of the things he said was that homosexuals or gays, I think said homosexuals, are a culturally oppressed minority. That language is very close to a nationally oppressed minority of African Americans, you see. He developed that particular angle. And he spent a good part of his life trying to develop a theory of analysis of why, using Marxist language, it was a historical necessity to have the culturally oppressed minority, why it was a historical necessity to suppress homosexuality. and he wanted to develop a unified theory. So he became quite involved with feminist theories also when that developed. One other thing I'll just say about how Mattachine was founded. He fell in love with an Austrian man who was a Jewish refugee. Rudy Genreich was his name. And he fell in love with Rudy. And Rudy agreed to be part of Mattachine. He couldn't find anybody who would be part of Mattachine, but Rudy would agree. And they were trying to think about how they could get other men, so it was during the Korean War. So this is 1950. And there was something called the Stockholm Peace Pledge, which the party was circulating at the time, so were a lot of other people, for not to have another world war, Stockholm Peace Pledge. And so they went to the beaches in Venice, and they knew where the gay part of the beach was. And they went and they started talking to guys about signing this petition for the Stockholm Peace Pledge. And while they were doing that, they talked to some of them about Mattachine. And that's how Mattachine got started. Within that movement, there were a few guys who were willing to come in on the Mattachine at the time.
And what I'm about to say is very undeveloped, but I wish Alex Dobkin was still alive so we could discuss this, because the approach to women's music and this idea of women's culture, it's very similar.
Yes, it is.
And I really wonder if she learned that in the party, and because it's very consistent. I mean, in her memoir, which is called My Red something.
My Red Blood. It's a wonderful book. Well, it's wonderful. You told me to read it.
Yeah, she talks about growing up in the party. I mean, that's what it's about. It's not about her lesbian life and being harassed by the government, but she doesn't make that connection between intellectual formation and her beliefs about women's culture. It's very interesting. Now, Lorraine Hansberry, now your father was her teacher, right? Didn't she take class with him?
No,
that
was Eleanor Flexner.
Oh, okay.
She took class, Lorraine took class with W.E.B. Du Bois.
Oh, okay. So let's go to Eleanor Flexner and we'll come back to Lorraine Hansberry. So here we're talking about really women's studies, the development of women's studies. So can you connect her experience in the party to that?
So Eleanor Flexner, for some of you who are a little bit older, her book, which is called Century of Struggle. And it was published in 1959 by Harvard University Press. And it was the first published single volume history of the women's suffrage movement, not by, Susan B. Anthony, or, you know what I'm saying? It was a separate work. It's intersectional in its analysis, race, class, gender. And I really noticed that when I was reading it. And when I first read it, which was many, many years ago, I thought to myself, this is really sort of Marxist, But, certainly it resonated in terms of the communist approach to things that I had learned. So that's intersectionality. That was very much a part of communist politics and communist thinking and historical analysis. So that's another origin story. There are many origin stories, there isn't one, but that was one of them. So I was in the way I found her. I mean, everybody's written about it. A lot of people have written about Eleanor Flexner, and nobody said she was a lesbian. And the way I figured it out was she corresponded with someone else who I knew was a lesbian because my father told me she was. And I don't know how he knew because everybody's so closeted, but her name was Bertha C. Reynolds, and she was the founder of social work in the United States. And that's another story. But anyway, Bertha would correspond with Eleanor. And when she corresponded with her, she always said, give my regards to Helen. Or she would address the letters to Helen also, Eleanor and Helen. So I thought, who's Helen? So that's what led me to go to see Eleanor's archive, which is at the Schlesinger Library. And there I was, and there was her oral history. And it was perfectly clear that she was lovers with this woman, Helen Terry. So I had another one. I was so excited. So I did a lot of research. So one of the most astonishing things when I was in her archive was I came upon a notebook of her notes with a class she took with my father. And it was she took the class at the Jefferson School, which was the Communist Party school in New York City on Broadway. I think the address was 853 Broadway before it was padlocked by the FBI in the late 50s. But she has all his notes. And the class she took with him was on Black history. So that was foundational to how she wrote that integrated analysis of Century of Struggle, because she then sought out Black women who were part of that movement. And she was also very, very anti-racist, very strongly anti-racist. So there's a lot of activism on her part. She and Helen were at the concert at Peekskill in 1949 when Paul Robeson sang. They had a harrowing, terrifying experience getting out. When she describes at one point they were standing in their bathtub, picking glass out of each other's hair and off their clothes, because the mob had attacked the bus they were on. So that's who she was. Now, what's also really profound to me about this is that if you look at the acknowledgements, sorry, I have to say one other thing. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, she heard Elizabeth Gurley Flynn do a speech about early women's organizing, and she loved it. She loved it. And she was taken to it by a woman named Marion Backrack, who most people don't know, but Marion was a fabulous woman. And I think she was a lesbian, but I didn't say so in the book because I couldn't prove it. I wasn't sure. But she was, and she died very young, but she was very close friends with Flynn. So Backrack took Eleanor to hear Elizabeth Gurley Flynn speak about women. And she was so, Eleanor said it was thrilling. She's just an old time soapbox speaker is what she said. And so she went to the library to find books about women in the labor movement and women in the suffrage movement, so on, and she couldn't find them. So she decided she would write one. And that, and so that's the origin of the book. But if you look at the acknowledgements when it was finally published, you wouldn't know she had any connection to the Communist Party. There's no acknowledgements of Marion, although Marion was somebody she talked to endlessly about the book. I have the documents where she said she did. So by 1959, you see, she erased all of that. She left the party in 57, which I understand. Almost everybody left the party in 57, but she erased that part of it. But that's where she got the very intersectional analysis.
Well, you have this really interesting trope in the book where you talk about how the party tries to hide files if there's an implication of homosexuality. And one of the example is Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and Marie Ecke, this doctor that she lived with, and how the late Roz Baxendall was trying to write a biography of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and couldn't get the files. And you think it's because the party was trying to hide her homosexuality.
Yeah.
Now, so let's get to Lorraine Hansberry, because I have the same question. Here they have a celebrity who then becomes gay, and they don't, I mean, how do they handle that? Because didn't they need to be associated with her on some level?
Yeah. So Hansberry, she was an amazing human being. That's just the first thing to say about her. But she was based in the Communist Party in Harlem, not the Communist Party on 26th Street, which was the white Communist Party. She was in the Black Communist Party, and never the twain shall meet in a certain kind of way. So that's one thing to understand about this, is that she was, and a lot of the biographies, they're very good biographies of Lorraine Hansberry that have been written, for example, by Imani Perry. It's a wonderful book. It's very, very beautifully done. I've corresponded a little bit with Imani, just beautiful work. And also the PBS that was shown. I think Heather Strain is the person who did that. But the point about it is they mention her that she's a communist. They mention that she's a lesbian, but they don't dwell on it. But you see, you can't understand Lorraine Hansberry, in my opinion, and the writing of Raisin in the Sun and everything else that she did, unless you understand that the Black communist intelligentsia of the 1940s and 50s was foundational to who she was. That's who mentored her. And I knew almost all of them because they were in my childhood. And when I first opened Lorraine Hansberry's file at the Schomburg Center, I came upon the condolences that she sent to the family of Louis Burnham, because Louis had died prematurely of a heart attack in 1960. I knew Louis very well. He was very close to my family. And I just started to cry in the library when I saw what it was. And then I saw Dorothy Burnham, the widow, with Dorothy's, whom I knew and loved as a child very strongly, her response to Lorraine. And I could see from that Lorraine was really part of their family. And I got permission to quote the letters and so on. So foundational, Paul Robeson, Eslander Robeson. If you, Raisin in the Sun has huge chunks of dialogue on African liberation that come right out of her notes with the class she took with Dr. Du Bois. And the only reason I noticed that, I have to tell you, the only reason I noticed it was I had been in the archive and I had read her notes and I read it. And then very shortly thereafter, I saw a student production of A Raisin in the Sun on my campus. And I was listening to the dialogue and I thought, I just read that. And that's how I noticed it. She was under constant surveillance. An FBI agent went to the play. He was asked if the play was communist. It was a communist play. He said no. And then he said, but there's a great deal about African liberation.
But so her husband,
Oh, yeah.
Howard Nemiroff, no, he was in the party, right?
Yeah, so Bob Nemiroff.
Bob, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so you want me to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, she met Bob Nemiroff on a picket line. He was a Jewish communist, and she married him in 1953. Very shortly after she married him, she wrote him a letter. I think I quoted in the book, and she told him that she was she didn't use the word lesbian, but she said, "I'm looking for the woman. I want to," it was clear. So he, I think, was remarkable in his devotion to her while and protecting her. And as soon as she had money on her own from Raisin in the Sun, she bought her own house at 112 Waverly Place. She lived on the top floor, and her lover, Dorothy Seckules, lived on the ground floor. When the FBI came and talked to Bob Nemiroff and said, how come she's moved? He said, oh, no, she hasn't moved. He protected her, you see. He lied. Well, of course, we all lied to the FBI. But he said, no, that's just where she writes.
But also, there's just in terms of how did she get her first play on Broadway? Alice Childress was already working. There were other Black women playwrights. They couldn't get a play on Broadway. Her very first play is on Broadway. And the funding networks, I think, were related to the party. And how did she get to Sidney Poitier? Through Harry Belafonte, right? So the party was a big part of that, I would assume.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And they all went to, so there's a story in there about she and Alice Childress and Du Bois, also Shirley and W.E.B. were also up there. They went to something called Camp Unity up in the Catskills in the summer. And she met various people there. And I'm forgetting the name of the man who actually produced A Raisin in the Sun. But he was I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but he was a music producer. And she did a reading of A Raisin in the Sun with Nemiroff and him being present. And also one of her lovers before Dorothy Seckules, another woman who was her lover. Molly, what's Molly's last name? Do you remember? Who became, oh, never mind. This is the lesbian gossip trade. You want to know who she became loving later, but never mind. It's not your maid here, But anyway, she did a reading of the play and he loved it. And he was a music producer. And he said, I'm going to put this on Broadway. And Nemiroff said, you can't, you can't raise, what are you thinking? You can't do this. You can't raise the money and so forth. But he did. He raised the money for it. And then so that's part of what happened. And it got onto Broadway. Portier was rising star at that point, as was the rest of the cast that was in it. And it was a huge success. It was a sensation. And so it did very well. And it wasn't a communist play, but maybe it was.
Right. Okay, well, let's open it up to people who have any comments. There's a lot of very knowledgeable people here, people who also were connected to the party, and we'll also take questions from the live stream.
Yes, thank you.
Blanche, do you want to start? You have anything to say?
Magic. All right.
Wonderful. Every word I said in that word.
Hey, wait. Here's your mic.
Oh, thank you, darling. Right. It's so wonderful. It's such a great read. It's so vivid and exciting. And I love the gossip. I want more. I have two questions, tiny little questions. Two people I'm really interested in. Flo Kennedy. Does she come up?
Of course, I knew her and I know who she was, but she's not in the book. And
Is she in the party?
No,
No.
as far as I could ascertain, she wasn't. So
Okay.
I stayed very strict with that because of
Right.
what I was trying to
Yeah,
do.
we were very close and I could never figure out if she
And
were in the party.
Casting no aspersions on anybody. Blanche, no aspersions on anybody who wasn't in the.
No,
party. I
no.
don't mean it like that.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
I just
The
stuck with that.
direction of her heart was absolutely with the
Totally,
party. Yeah.
totally.
But so I wondered. And the other, Annette Rubenstein.
Mhm.
So can you say a few words about Annette? I could say one thing about Annette.
Who is that? I don't know.
Oh,
she'll tell you.
she was a great educator and
Loftus, yeah.
wrote many books, published all over the world. I mean, all of her books on the left were literally published for, I don't know, China. Yeah. But there was a Marxist feminist study group that I was in and that she was in. And it was so many years ago, and we were thinking about coming out as queer, some of us, and hesitating. And it was Annette who said, you have to come out. And I thought that was really
Oh.
sort of remarkable.
So that is remarkable because I knew she was in the party, of course. And I think I knew her. I think I've met her a few times, but I could not establish her sexuality.
I don't think she was, I don't know. I mean,
I don't think she was queer.
We don't know.
Yeah, so
we
and the
thought she
people
was,
the
but
people I talked to, Blanche, about who knew her, especially Mary Louise Patterson, did not think she was. And there was no way I could, and so that was part of my problem. You see that I was very conscientious. If I was going to say that somebody was queer, I had to have like with Eleanor Flexner, I had the evidence in front of me.
yeah. Well, I mean, we never knew in this study group, but she was the most radical and encouraged us all who were queer to come out. So, it was really amazing.
That's very interesting. That's a great story. Thank you.
Judy Clark over here.
I don't know if I need it.
Yes,
Yeah,
because the
for the-
people
for
on
the
the
live
live stream.
First of all, this is just wonderful. I feel like I don't know, I'm back in my parents' house or something. Only we're all out. And they're turning over in their graves. What can I say? But well, one person that I was wondering if you talk about in the book was Joe Sinclair.
Yeah. Mhm. I know who she is, the writer
Mhm.
and the novelist.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Was out, wrote novels in the 50s as a lesbian communist.
yeah. but I wasn't clear. Again, this is one of these areas. That's why I didn't include
Mhm.
her. I read the novel. I mean, I knew, but I didn't know how to show that she was in the Communist Party.
Got it.
So this
Mhm.
is part of the problem of people being so far underground. I
Sure.
couldn't always establish it. And again, I was very, I mean, I may have erred on the side of caution. I may have been too cautious, but that's a good example of it. And I remember when I started reading, I was here actually, well, not here in this building, but at the Tamament when I started running around in the library there to read her novels.
I mean, just when I try to think of the courage that it took for her to
Yeah,
I mean, she was very intersectional in all of her stuff.
absolutely.
So I thought about that. And also pro-psychoanalytic, which was interesting. And then just a question, which may be obvious, but I felt like I grew up in a very patriarchal communist and then ex-communist family and community where, I mean, and it was patriarchal in the sense that sort of, you know, the men were the ideologues, the women did all the mass organizing. You know, my mother was hysterical in how she talked about it, but the relationship between the, you know, their position on homosexuality and their position on women, I guess is what I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Very patriarchal, very patriarchal. But see, it's complicated because then you have somebody like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, right? Who, as Sarah said, you know, lived with Dr. Marie Ecke for 10 years. And Marie Ecke was I'll just say a little bit about that because, well, that's a tangent from what you're asking. My family also, you know, all the families I knew in the Communist Party and around it, yes, the men were the ideologues. My father was described in the New York Times as the leading theoretician of the Communist Party, you know, like that. And my mother was the organizer. And my mother also was the one who supported the family. She worked. And my father was blacklisted from when he got his PhD in 42. And then he was overseas during the war. And then he could not get a job until sometime in the 60s and 70s with the upsurge in black studies and things like that. And it was never a regular employment. But so that's absolutely the case. And all the families I knew, except among Black families. Okay. So Paul and Aslanda Robeson, for example, she had a professional career. She was you say phlebotomist, the person who does the blood work. She had a very established career. And of course, he was the celebrity, but she held her own. She was a delegate to a very important conference, the first All Asian Women's International meeting that was held in Beijing, then called Peking in 1949. She was among the US delegates. Shirley Graham Du Bois. Well, there's some funny stories about Dr. Du Bois's sexism. He could be pretty sexist. I'm not telling them right now, but but she held her own. The point is, these women held their own and had a certain status within the communist left that I think was not the case for many of the white families that I knew of, where the women were the organizers, but they didn't have any status. That's what I'm getting at here.
Now, don't you say in the book that Du Bois's son was gay?
Yes. So should I say something about that? Yes. So one of the people I grew up with, he was older than me, of course, but I always felt he was like my older brother, was David Du Bois. So his full name is David Graham Du Bois. And his mother was Shirley Graham. And when Shirley married Dr. Du Bois in 1951, he took the Du Bois name also. And we were very close. And I didn't see him very often because he lived in Cairo. And he was a radio journalist and a very fine one. And he also wrote a novel. that's called And Bid Him Sing, which he wasn't a great novelist, but it's a very interesting book that has an amazing scene with Malcolm X. So that's David, okay? And he came back to the United States in 1973 in order to edit the newspaper of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. And he taught because he had the journalistic skills, and he was trying to help because everybody was in prison, you know. Anyway, I hadn't seen him for years and years and years. And then he was teaching part-time at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he was part-time in Cairo. And the reason was he was helping to secure the placement of Dr. Du Bois's papers and establish a Du Bois Foundation in Amherst. A colleague who recently passed away, but John Bracey, who was head of Afro-American Studies, brought us together. And I didn't know we were going to see each other. And so I was in the room and David came in, and I describe it in the book because we were crying and we were laughing and we were kissing each other. And it was like, I mean, it was an incredible moment. And then David stepped back, and the first thing he said to me, the first words he spoke to me was, he said, "You know, I'm gay." So I write about him.
And so how did Du Bois handle that?
Well, so everybody's closeted, right? So I don't know. And Shirley, I call her Shirley because I knew her so well, but Shirley never said a word. And I saw her in the 70s. I mean, she had to have known she was living with him because she had been in Ghana. You know, Dr. Du Bois and Shirley Graham Du Bois went to Ghana in 1961. And that's where they lived as guests of the Nkrumah government. And then when Nkrumah was overthrown, Dr. Du Bois had already passed away, and then Nkrumah was overthrown and she had to flee. And she ended up stateless. I mean, it was a horrible time, but she ended up in Cairo, but David saved her and brought her to Cairo. And so she was living with him. So she has to have known, right? She came back to the United States at various times in the 70s when I saw her, talk, read her stuff, read things that she was writing on African liberation and Black liberation and so forth. But she never said a word. So just think about how hard it was for him. You know, and here I was a lesbian. See, he knew I was a lesbian. It was like he took a breath. He took a breath in this wonderful, wonderful moment of.
Mhm.
Also, if he was living in Cairo, right? And so he spent most of his time there, did you ever get to talk to him about what it was like for him as a gay man in the Arab world?
Only he told me no. The answer to that question is really no, because what he said to me was, and again, it's in the book, I describe it. He loved living in Cairo. He loved living in Egypt. And part of the reason was everybody looked like him. So the racism that was every day in the United States was no longer a factor. And you know, it was different. It was beautiful. So from that point of view, there was very great comfort. He also lived in a beautiful home that Nasser had originally provided for Dr. Du Bois and Shirley Graham Du Bois. And he inherited it and was right on the Nile. I mean, really, you know. And he was well known for throwing elaborate parties where people came, you know, like that. So he carried the Du Bois name in a certain kind of way that was, I think, of very great benefit. And yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Well, Bettina, I just congratulate you on this brilliant book, and it's such a contribution not only to queer scholarship, but to scholarship, progressive people of all stripes. And just for the benefit of the rest of the audience, I'm the co-host, together with this fine co-host, Naomi Brussel, of the Out FM radio show on WBAI, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Tune us in. And we had the great privilege of interviewing Bettina for a 3-part series about communists in closets. And we offered that as a premium, and we're still offering it. But it was really a privilege to be able to learn of the intense research that she had done, and the great heart and the great love that she has for queers in the party and who left the party. So I only have two questions that you have talked about in your book and on our show, but I think people might appreciate these. Actually, one of them I learned about after I interviewed you. I did some journal research and found out that David Graham Du Bois actually was very Pan-African, and he was drawn to Malcolm X, and he helped to promote Malcolm throughout Africa
That's right.
and to kind of link up his ideological approach with others in Africa. And maybe you can elaborate on that. And then I have the question about the overthrow of the ban by the party in 91, 92, which obviously most immediately came out of the split in the party because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also because of the incredible rise of Queer Liberation, ACT UP, and all of the events happening in the late 80s. So if you could talk more about how the ban got lifted and who were some of the sheroes and heroes and theyros in the party that forced them to lift it. Way too late.
Thank you, Bob. Great question. So I just want to affirm what you said. I think it's in the section on David in the book. He was a great advocate of Pan-African, and that that's an inheritance from Du Bois also. I mean, that's carrying on what Du Bois first proposed in 1919. Was a Pan-African movement, and so you very much have that in David Du Bois is carrying it on, and as you said, introducing Malcolm. I mean, trying to. There was a conference. I don't remember the title of the conference in Cairo, but that was the occasion for David to meet Malcolm X. And then he was introducing him to all the people he knew, you see, because he had such celebrity, and the house he lived in was such a center for African unity. And I think that was actually the title of the conference. I think it was Pan-African Unity was the title of the conference, and Malcolm X was a speaker there. So that's very much a part of that. And then the second, what?
How did the ban get
Oh,
dropped?
how did the ban get lifted? Yes, by accident. So, yeah, I'll get a little more detail. Okay, so look, I left the Communist Party in 1981 because it was untenable for me as an out lesbian to continue my membership in the party. So you need to know that. So all of my information about what happened in 1991 is secondhand. I was not at any of these meetings, but my former husband was, and Angela Davis was, and Charlene Mitchell was, and these are all people who are in the party, So, I mean, I learned a lot about and my father, did I say my father? So I learned a lot about what had happened there. It was a brutal meeting. It was a terrible meeting. It took place in Cleveland. And what you had was an old guard symbolized by Gus Hall, who was the general secretary of the party, who was the worst womanizer and the worst homophobe among those that I have known. I mean, he was among the worst. When you talk about male chauvinism, oh my God. So, and he had quite a reputation about it. He was a former steel worker. He had helped to organize the Steel Workers Union. So anyway, the party split apart in 1991. And when it split, one section of it that included my dad and Angela Davis and these other people I was mentioning formed something called the Committees of Correspondence for Peace, Democracy, and Socialism. And that was a kind of broad idea of a left coalition that would include people who had been in the Communist Party, but others were welcome to join it. And it lifted the ban. So that's not by accident. It lifted the ban on gays and lesbians being part of that movement. And it was after that the old Communist Party based in New York lifted the ban itself. Because I think it became untenable for them to continue to hold it after they had split apart in the way that they did. So I think that's what happened. One of the people I interview in the book is named Eric Gordon. And Eric is a gay man who was never able to join. He wrote dozens of letters trying to get the party to rescind its ban starting in the 70s and 80s. And he's now a reporter and writer for the People's Daily World, which is the party's publication in Los Angeles. But I talked to Eric and they were just intransigent. They were just intransigent. You just couldn't move them. And I found a lot of evidence in the archives of people who wrote letters to the national office here in New York and said, please let gay people, lesbians join the Communist Party. And also we're having trouble recruiting people who are not gay because they think that this is a terrible, is unprincipled. So I think I have that in the book, but that was part of what was happening. And they were just intransigent. And I discovered how many people in the party, not gay people, how many people in the party wrote to the national office and asked them to lift this ban. And most often that I could see, never even got a reply. Never even got a response.
One last question.
Can I hop
Yeah,
in? We've
sure.
got several questions actually from the
Okay.
live stream. One quickie. Was James Baldwin in the Communist Party?
He was not in the Communist Party, but he was great friends with Lorraine Hansberry.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question from the live stream is a little bit longer. Now, the US and China are competing for global hegemony and debating which political ideology, democracy/capitalism versus socialism with Chinese characteristics, is best for human well-being. Some scholars studying China argue that the Communist Party ruling socialism in China offers a better system to actualize LGBTQ rights and equality than democracy in Taiwan. However, Taiwan became the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage and enjoy LGBTQ inclusive education at the national level. Based on your historical study, is communism better for LGBTQ plus people than democracy? Why or why not? And what would you say to the current global ideological competition? Thank you.
Well, I think the first thing I would say to whoever, yeah, that's the first thing I was going to say. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, is I don't think that capitalism is particularly I mean, I don't think we live in well, we do live in a democracy, but boy, is it under threat. And it's very complicated what this democracy looks like. So that dichotomy, that dualism between communism and democracy, I don't hold with. I think you're accurate. I would say you're talking about. Then the second thing I would say is China is so far from being a socialist country at this point that it's very hard to even talk about it. They call themselves the Communist Party of China. I understand that. I'm respectful, but they do not have a socialist society, and it's not. They not anymore. It's long gone. Just as is the case in Russia. It's long gone. So there's certain foundational parts of that question that I disagree with the foundation of the question. So that makes it sort of difficult to respond to that. But the more we can assert, let me phrase it this way, the more we can assert and engage with gay and lesbian, trans rights, the better, regardless of the society in which you're living. Because, and this is another big part of my book, is I'm trying to argue that gay and lesbian and trans people, queer people, I'll use that, okay, umbrella phrase, have an insight about the nature of society that heterosexual people don't have. And I can't, it's hard to explain, but sexuality is a core identity. And when you have a queer identity, you look at things in a very, very different way. And so the affirmation of that means that I think it's very important for people on the left who are not queer to read the literature, read the books, read the poetry, listen to the music and so forth of queer people, because it's a different consciousness. And so it's not just about human rights. Good on human, of course, it's about human rights, but it's not just about human rights. And a big part of this book was to try to get people on the left to think differently about the queer community.
You have one more, right?
Oh, I have more. Yeah.
Well,
Do we
you
have
could be
time?
judicious, you know. Yeah,
Do we have time for more?
you can sort. Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
a good one.
Oh, okay. No pressure. All right. Can you speak to some of the intellectual architecture of the Communist Party homophobia beyond the security risk aspect? Did it evolve over time? Did people take it seriously?
I think, yeah, that's a very good question. And
Ooh, okay. I picked the right one.
And I think what it's just that the people in the Communist Party who were homophobic, who cared about it, besides the issue of security and that, which is a totally made up. But I just want to say, of all the agents that surfaced in all the trials relating to communists during the 50s, none were queer.
Hmm.
The only queer person was a woman named Angela, I think her last name was Corliss, who joined the Communist Party. She was already she was a lesbian. She joined the Communist Party in order to become an informant, not because she was being blackmailed by anybody. So the whole thing is bogus. That whole argument has no water at all. But the other thing is that people were just bigoted. They were just bigoted. And all the taboos that are so old in the society, in all the religious traditions that are so embedded, is also connected also to male supremacy. So it's a bundle. It's tied together with male supremacy, because and I talk about this in the book a little bit of the theory about this. Gerda Lerner, who's the historian Gerda Lerner, wrote about this, where she talks about the creation of patriarchy, the origins of patriarchy, which is over a considerable period of time. And one of the points that she makes in there is women were the first property before there was private property. That's how far back the oppression of women goes. And it was about establishing patrilineal descent, and the children of a patrilineal family had to be guaranteed to be that man's, right, that the patriarch's children. And what's embedded in that she doesn't say is, if you're enforcing a patriarchal family like that, you have to be enforcing heterosexuality, right? That it's foundational to it. Then you build all the arguments about it, about, that it's taboo and so forth. But if it's foundational to it, the other thing I point out is that men have always had greater freedoms than women to be able to have sexual liaisons outside of marriage. Some of them are straight, but a lot of them are queer. So that's what I would say about
Well, I think we should end there. I just want to, before we thank Bettina, I just want to say that we're going to be speaking again tomorrow at the Bureau, which is at the Lesbian and Gay Center on 13th Street at 7 o'clock. And also, if you're interested in the history of CLAGS, Marty Duberman's new book, which is called Turning 90, what is it? Reaching 90, has so much dirt on what happened with CLAGS and why it's here and all of that. I highly recommend it. And Bettina, thank you so much. Thank you.
so much. And I will just say one other thing. I have one more copy of the book. If anybody wants to buy it from me at the price that I pay as the author, so it's a lot less than what the publisher.
If you were in the Communist Party, you have a discount. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Thank you
so
so
much,
much.
everyone. We really appreciate it. Thank you for coming and joining us at CLAGS, and thanks to both of you.
Tomorrow, we're gonna do a whole different question.
I can imagine.